Hello, hello, and good evening to everyone. Today's session is day 14. Yesterday, we started with the syllabus of GIC2 and we covered the learning outcomes 5.1 and 5.2. Okay, so 5.1 is about noise and 5.2 vibration. So, with regards to each of the hazard categories or the topics of the learning outcome, we would be discussing about the principles or the definitions related to that hazard category. And we look at the hazards, risk, and the control measures. So, for instance, with noise, we discussed about the anatomy of ear or the structure of the ear to better understand how noise exposure and affects people at workplace. And so here it has outer ear, middle, and inner ear. And in the inner ear there is an organ cochlea which converts, the hair cells in the cochlea converts the sound waves into electrical signals, which is sent to the brain through the auditory nerve for interpretation. And today morning, I believe I shared a few video link about this noise and how it affects people at work. And then we looked at some of the key health and safety hazards from workplace noise exposure and the mitigating factors. Okay, so similarly for vibration, we discussed about hand-arm vibration and whole body vibration. So, what are the health hazards and the control measures? So, before moving on to 5.3, today I would start with discussing the section 1, okay, of the GC2 risk assessment guidance. Okay, just give me a moment. I'll open the template. Yes. So looking at the template which you would be completing and submission would be done again through online portal. So this is an assessment template for unit GNC2 National General Certificate and International General Certificate on managing risk and risk assessment. Okay. So this template you will be completing and submit as part of your assessment process. So this template, it contains four sections. Section 1 is background. Section 2, risk assessment. And then you have section 3, prioritize one hazard to manage from the risk assessment that was completed in section 2. And section 4, communicate, check, and review. Okay. So the template design clearly tells you what you need to enter on each of the text boxes. So the requirement is given on the left hand column and you will have to write your your part of your answers in the right column. So similarly, you could see for other sections. So it clearly explains what is required to be entered on each of the text box given below, and there are also marks allocated within the brackets that will also guide you and to score your maximum. So today I would cover the requirements of section 1 background. Okay, and after completing the the section 1 background, then we would continue with the learning outcome 5.3 and 5.4. Okay, so what is the section 1 background? and what information is required from the learner, and what and all these informations will be covered in this guidance document. Okay, so this risk assessment document, you yesterday I showed you that you can access as what happened, oh, I closed it, sorry. Yes, so if you go to NEBOSH website, and under your qualifications, certificates, you go to the resources, and you should able to find. Okay, I didn't WhatsApp these resources, right? I said I would, but I don't remember WhatsApping this document. So I will be WhatsApping uh, maybe during the first break. So you can save those, in your computer, or you can directly visit this website, NEBOSH site, for downloading. And it is also available to download from the Cognisphere LMS portal. Okay, all right. So, so this is the practical guidance document here. Okay. So this is a document I will be referring. Oh, okay. So like I said, there are four sections, and today I would be covering the requirements of section one. The other sections I would be covering in the subsequent weeks. Okay. So what is section one? And before section one, what is the learning objective or learning outcome of this IG2 risk assessment? Okay. So, learning outcome, understand how to justify moral and safety improvements using moral, financial, and legal arguments, which we covered in 1.1. Assess general workplace risk. So, you would be carrying out a risk assessment and understand a range of common workplace hazards and their associated risk and recommended suitable control measures. So this is what the syllabus. Okay, so from physical to chemical hazards, manual handling hazards, electricity. So we would be understanding a range of common workplace hazards. So as you could see here, so we would be understanding a range of common workplace hazards and the control measures. So assessment criteria discuss the moral, financial, and legal reasons for managing health and safety in the workplace. Apply the principles of the risk assessment process, which was covered in 3.4. So if you remember, step one, identify the hazard, then the people who might be harmed and how, the control measures, and then recording the findings and reviewing the assessment. So we would be applying that concept in this assessment. So you would produce a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. So your risk assessment should be relevant to the workplace that you have chosen, the work activities carried out, and the hazards and control measures. And then describe hazards present in the workplace and associated risk. So if you look into this section 2, column 1, so column one is where you're going to describe your hazards, and column two, who might be harmed and how they would be harmed. And you would then outline the existing control measures. Okay, so here, so next column 2.5, what are you already doing to control the risk and what further actions? And finally, you would be explaining the suitable control measures upon evaluation, which is in section number 3. Okay. So how many hazards that we would be focusing on section 2 is minimum 10. And as you see here, the template itself has 10 number of rows. So there is no need to write more than 10. Okay, but minimum this 10 should be included. If you're writing 8 or less than 10, then your marks would be significantly impacted. So do not include any additional rows or hazards. So we should write minimum 10, and we will be completing all the columns. Okay, we will never be leaving any columns blank. So what and how you will write in this section 2, I would be discussing in the next session. So today we'll go back to the background. So the assessment should be carried out in your own workplace. Okay. So already I have given an overview on it. So where you would be doing this assessment on your own workplace. So that is what is recommended. Okay. Because you're already familiar with the workplace hazards and controls and what are the activities carried out. Okay. So from your workplace, you would be deciding what is the scope of your assessment, and within that scope, you would be completing your risk assessment. Okay. But however, this means that your assessment will be realistic and enable you to apply your skills in a real world context. Your workplace should be large enough to provide a sufficient range of hazards and categories hazards. So I would explain when we discuss the section 1. So if the workplace is large, in order that the assessment is manageable, you should limit the area considered. Okay, so you have to carefully select what is the scope of your risk assessment, because we know the requirement is to identify 10 hazard categories. Okay, now if I select a very large scope, and if I write 10 hazard categories, my assessment will not be suitable and sufficient. So it is important that your assessment should be suitable and sufficient. Okay, so to meet the criteria, we have to select a workplace which is large enough to meet that scope, and also at the same time, it should not be large enough to make that assessment insufficient. Okay. So now with the assessment template, you would be completing the template and submitting it electronically. So you should only use the assessment template, never use any blank Word document. Okay, the assessment clearly tells you what is required, and it would be very simplified process for you rather using the any other own document. So complete all sections of the template and referring to this document. Okay. So this document for additional guidance that should help you ensure that you receive a pass of your assessment. Okay. So this document explains how or what is required to be filled in each of these sections, and your syllabus, the study book and other reference content will give you will give you content to fill. Okay, so first it is important that you complete your studies. Okay, you will have to complete the study of all the elements, and then you would be completing this draft, because it is all about applying the knowledge and about what we have learned. So it is important you complete the study preparation, and then you start with the section, this risk assessment. But for section 1, you can start at any time, because we are not giving any technical informations related to our subject. Rather, it is about the workplace that you have selected. So it is a generalized information. So you can start with your section 1 background, but section 2 and subsequent sections, you will have to only attempt once you complete the preparation of the syllabus. Or let's say I'm going to discuss about noise. Yes, you can start discussing about noise, because we already covered that learning outcome. So as we cover the learning outcome, and if those learning outcome, the topics is part of your assessment, then you would be parallelly preparing. But anyway, still you will have 2 weeks of time, as we discussed, from your GC1 submission date. Okay. So GC2, you will have 2 weeks from your GC1 examination date as a submission deadline to upload. Okay. So for example, if you are registering for July 8th GC1 examination, your submission deadline for GIC2 would be 22nd of July. Likewise, if you are registering for 5th of August GIC1, the submission deadline for GIC2 would be 19th of August. And for other month dates, you can refer to your NEBOSH website. Okay. So again, you could see the submission deadline. So all general informations you can directly find from this page. So your assessment will be marked by NEBOSH appointed examiner. So both of your papers, GIC1, GIC2, they are marked by NEBOSH appointed examiners. So learning partners, they would not be assessing your papers. Okay. All right. So any doubts so far? Any clarifications needed until now? Okay. Thank you for your response. So what is section 1 background? Okay. So this part, how to fill this section 1 background and what information is required. Start by giving a clear and concise description of your chosen organization. Okay. So as an examiner, they may not be familiar with the workplace that you have chosen. So it is important that you should give a general description about or the background about the workplace that you select. Okay. So those informations will be completed in the section 1. Okay. Now, again, as mentioned on this day 12, if you do not have a workplace, for example, you do not have any working experience, uh, you may have to select any workplace as part of assessment. Okay. Now, as a guidance, you can go to this HSC website and industries A to Z. You can go to industries, and here you would find a list of industries that you can choose. Okay. So this assessment can be done for any type of workplace. Okay. Whether it is like here agriculture or air transport, so any type of workplace can be selected for the purpose of the assessment. So what is important is we should be understanding the requirements of this guidance, and appropriate information must be filled in the template. So that is where the marking would be focused. So there is no extra marking for the type of workplace that you select. Okay. So you should start by giving a clear and concise description of your chosen organization. Normally, the organization you work for, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. So even if you have a work experience, it doesn't have to be that you should only choose the organization that you're working for. You can also choose a type of workplace for which you do not have the worked for confidentiality reasons. You can anonymize the name and location of your organization. Okay. So if you do not want to disclose the name of the organization or the location, you can use false name, but everything must be factual. Okay. But still remember, this is for only for the purpose of the assessment as part of the certification. But still, if you feel that you do not want to disclose the name of the organization, you could use a false details. Okay. You also need to think about the scope of the risk assessment, so which is very important. Okay. For example, are you going to look at the whole organization or just a specific department or work area? Okay. If you work for a large organization, we recommend that you concentrate on a part of the organization or specific activity or process. If you're unsure, ask your tutor for advice. Okay. So what is scope and what is required to understand about this, particularly these two statements. Okay. So before that, we'll go to the form. So 1.1, name of the organization. So you can type the name of the organization for which the assessment is done. Clear? So you can directly type any fictitious name. Okay, so for example, if I say, so if, like for example, I can say FD catering. Okay, so you just give a name for the organization, and then the site locations. Okay, site location, you just have to specify the the general location. Okay, so you do not need to give the full address, just the general location. You include the city name and the country, or just the city name. Okay, so for example, I may type here Dubai. Yes, you can specify the actual name of the company also. Okay. So, but still, if for confidentiality purpose, if you do not want, then you can disclose with any false details. So I've just put some random name here. Okay. So name of the organization, site location, full address is not required. Just mention the city name. Even you do not have to mention the district name and all. Okay, so they just need to know, what is the compliance requirements of the country. But again, city name is enough. Or I may even put next. Okay, so I hope so. 1.1 and 1.2 is clear. So 1.1, you are just going to mention the name of the organization. 1.2, site location, and you could see there is no marks given for 1.1 and 1.2. Okay, no marks is given, but still you cannot leave that column blank. Without the name or the location, it would be difficult for anybody to assess any assessment. Okay, so not
Uh, sorry,
awarded marks, but
sorry.
should be included for completeness of the assessment. Okay, similarly 1.2, not awarded marks, but again should be included for the completeness of the assessment. Next is 1.3, brief description of the organization. Okay. Yes, please. Your question.
Yeah, actually, my question is like, for example, you told the name. Organization name can be anonymous, right?
Yes,
But
it
is
can.
it required to be like somewhat, for example, like you have mentioned FD catering, some name, okay? In
Yes.
that, from the name it shows catering. But my risk assessment, if I do for fabrication, is okay, or it should be resemble something like FD fabrication,
Yeah,
something like that.
it has to be like FD fabrication. Okay.
Okay, noted, yeah.
So, but don't put a ABC company and all. This and all you can avoid. Okay. So, if, for
Noted,
example,
yeah.
your name is Vinod Kumar, maybe you can put VK Fabrication, something like that. Okay.
Noted, clear. Actually, this is a silly question, but I wanted to ask that one.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no. Any questions? Do not make any assumption. That's what I used to say. Do not make any assumption. So even if you have any, clarifications, we have to sort it out. Okay. So 1.3, a brief description about the organization. This should be a general summary of work activities carried out, products manufactured, and general shift patterns. Because the assessor will not know what type of workplace you have chosen, you have to give a background. Now, very similar to what we have, if you have seen in the question papers that we have been discussing for the scenario, they first start by giving a background of the company, like it is a retail store, they have a warehouse, there are 20 people working, and two shift patterns. So those type of information is required in 1.3. Now they have given an example. Okay, the company provides ground inspection reports for construction sites before work commences. Okay, so this company is responsible for providing ground inspection reports. The management team, administrators, and cleaner are based in the main office building. Office opening hours are Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 25 site inspectors are home based and travel around the region to provide site inspections. So, again, you could clearly see the information how it is presented. Do not see, sometimes what people do is they go to the company website because it is asking about the organization. They go to company website, especially there will be something like an about us section in a company website, and they'll just copy paste those informations not required, like information such as when was this company founded, where are they located in different parts of the country, what are the certifications or standards that they have in place. It's like, those information not required, to the point, what are they, what service they provide, or what service they provide, and how many, what type of categories of people working, what and then the shift patterns and working hours, if any. If there are multiple shift patterns, you can specify shift 1 hours and shift 2 hours, and apart from that it is a very generic information. Okay, so it is 1 mark, so you can just stick to 2 to 3 sentences. You do not need to write in detail about the company. So when someone is reading this, they clearly they will understand that, okay, what this company is doing, and who are the people, and where are they located, and what are their working hours. Because based on this description only, you're going to write your hazards. So for example, if I say it is a chemical plant company, and then I would tell what are the activities carried out, and from those activities I'm going to identify the hazards and the suitability of the controls. Okay, so similarly, if my workplace is a restaurant, then I would specify what are the activities carried out in a restaurant, and from those activities, what are the hazards and suitability of the controls. So similarly, here in this example, it is a company which provides ground inspection reports. So the subsequent explanation for other sections will be based on this. Okay. So here you would be typing about the brief description of the organization in very simple words. So if anybody is reading that, they should able to visualize, okay, this is what the company, this is the service they provide, and these are the number of peoples and their working hours. To that extent, it is enough. And then 1.4, number of workers and typical roles. Okay. So only a general overview is required here rather than listing every role within an organization. Okay. So you may, if you're working in, if you're choosing your own workplace, then definitely you will have access to your organizational chart. What type of, what are the different roles in your organization and so on. But again, you don't have to list every role, but an overview. Okay. So example, 45 workers comprising of a management team of 8, and 25 site inspectors, 11 administrators, and 1 cleaner. Okay, so this is the information required in 1.4, which is again a maximum of 1 mark is awarded. Okay. And then 1.5 is where you give more information about the scope of your assessment. Okay. So description of the area or process to be included in the risk assessment. Okay. Now what is the difference between 1.3 and 1.5? So in 1.3, you're giving a general description about the organization. 1.5, you're specifying the scope of your risk assessment. Okay, so this scope should be selected based on what, how many number of hazard categories that we are going to complete in section 2. So a description of the area is where marks depends, awarded depends on the level of detail given in this section. Okay, a brief description would be high level overview and would be awarded 1 mark. A more detailed description would include the building, major parts of it, the task carried out, and equipment used, and would be awarded full 2 marks. So they have given example of a brief description, so which will satisfy for 1 mark, and the example of a detailed description. Okay. So if I read the brief description, the assessment will cover the main office building, which has 2 floors. The organization carries out administrative tasks in that building. Now, detailed description: a main office building located on an industrial estate, as well as a home-based workers. Mainly administration tasks take place within the building, as well as the use of a heavy-duty shredder. The two-story building includes office area, kitchen, and a large meeting room. Okay, so you can able to visualize. The site also includes a small car park, an outside area comprising a smoking shelter and a seating areas. Okay, so you could see the difference between these two descriptions. Now going back to the learning criteria. Okay, so your workplace should be large enough to provide a suitable range of hazards. And if the workplace is very large, in order that the risk assessment is manageable, you should limit the area considered. Okay, so this is what about 1.5. So for example, let's say, where's that? Yeah. Okay. For instance, let's say I choose a hospital and 1.3. Okay. And if I say this is it's a large hospital, okay, uh, considering there are many departments, okay, for example, you have, what is pediatric spelling? Is it correct? Okay. So, so you have pediatric, you have dental, you have eye, okay, so like this. So you have many departments like a large hospital. And considering the staff, okay, there are like maybe like 250 staff working. Okay, and now in my scope of the risk assessment, okay, so scope of RA, if I say the whole hospital, okay, the risk assessment is done for the whole hospital. Okay, and then I identify 10 hazards. Okay, because the requirement is we need to identify 10 hazards. Okay, for example, from this list I have identified 10 hazards for the scope, which is for the whole risk assessment. Okay, for example, I've identified as radiation, to be very specific. Okay, electricity, chemical, biological, okay, fire, and so on. So 10 numbers. Okay. Now, it doesn't use a spell check. Identify. So my general question here is the purpose of a risk assessment or any risk assessment, the suitability and sufficiency is to identify hazards, okay, potential to cause harm, and then you are going to recommend controls, okay, to mitigate, okay, and you are going to implement controls that are adequate. So if you see here, to identify hazards potential to cause harm, okay, and here if I ask you, if I'm preparing a risk assessment, okay, the entire document contains 10 hazards, and I say the risk assessment is done for a hospital that has 20 to 50 staff, and there are, let's say there are 10 departments, okay. Now if I ask you, do you think, or 8 departments, okay, so do you think there will be only 10 hazards in a hospital that has 8 different departments which employs 250 staff? Do you think we can only identify 10 hazards potential to cause harm? Yes or no? So, do you think there will only be 10 hazards potential to cause harm? No. Okay. Because it's a very large scope here I have with 8 departments, and if I say there's I identify only 10 hazards, that means my assessment is not suitable and sufficient. So okay, so we know how many hazards as a minimum I should include. So that means accordingly I have to reduce my scope. Okay. So this is what is mentioned here. So now if I rework on my scope, okay, now I say that the risk assessment scope is for a dental department, okay, dental department, and it's admin areas, okay. And now if I say I identified 10 hazards, okay, from the dental department scope alone, now would it be suitable and sufficient? So here now I have reduced my scope. Okay. So your organization size, everything is absolutely fine. That informations we are giving. But for the scope of the risk assessment, I have included only dental department. So this risk assessment will identify the hazards and the suitability of the controls for the dental department. And now if I say I have identified 10 hazards, yes, it makes the risk assessment suitable and sufficient. Rather, if I say there are 10 hazards for the whole hospital, so accordingly, you are going to keep your scope. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, you chose a dental department and you are able to identify only 7 hazards. Now you increase the scope. Okay. So that you can do it. Okay. For example, this risk assessment will focus on the dental department and then the admin activities related to the dental, or you may include the reception. Or I may say this risk assessment is only focusing on the reception and the dining or the waiting patient waiting area. So you decide a scope, and for that scope, your hazards must be relevant. Okay. If I say I choose an hospital and I choose a dental, but if I'm talking about hazards related to cleaning activities or something that is not relevant, then it will not be sufficient. Okay. Yes, question please.
My question is, for example, I am writing my research assessment is on a dental and as you told, like some medical related. But the examiner who is reviewing my this one, like he may not be from this medical background. Like how is going to assess my this one? Like what I've written is correct or wrong?
Okay. Okay. Now, yes, your scope is dental. but the hazards that you're going to include is based on the topic syllabus, okay, radiation or manual handling. So we are selecting topics from this list only, okay, this list. So for example, let's say if I've chosen, let's say construction company, okay, where noise is a potential hazard. See, we are not going to give much of medical details here to satisfy the need. For example, I have chosen a construction, and like you said, the examiner does not have any experience related to construction activities. Okay, and here I am writing about noise, and because hospital they don't have noise, so I've chosen a construction, and in the hazard description, I'm going to write about. Uh, Okay, so use of concrete breaker for walkway construction. And here you're going to write who might be harmed and how. Okay, so for example, exposure to, high noise from concrete breaker will result in, so the consequences, what we discussed yesterday, will result in tinnitus, comma, noise induced hearing loss. Okay, and safety concerns. For example, I will be detailing again when I'm discussing section 2. And in terms of control measures, okay, I'm going to talk about the worker using hearing protection. Okay, and there are regular maintenance of, maintenance records of concrete breaker. And for example, here you're recommending a, you know, substitution. Or I would say work carried out during, let's say, job rotation,
Giving regular breaks.
regular breaks, and use of damping or wait, partition. This is outdoor activity. So partition, isolation, I can't include. Okay, let's
Earplug or
assume this.
earmuff.
Earmuff is already here. Now you see the level of information that you have written, even for an examiner who has a good knowledge on health and safety, but not a very technical knowledge on construction, they should able to assess what you have written. Okay, so they are just going to see, have you given a proper description of the hazard? They are going to verify, is your risk identified is relevant to the hazard that you have described, and they're going to identify whether the controls that you have identified is well is, is adequate enough for this activity. So similarly, when you're talking about a dental department, you're going to say, for example, you're talking about a radiation, you're going to specify what is the source of radiation, and then what are the health and safety risk from exposure to radiation, which we would be covering in 5.3. And then what are the control measures to protect and to minimize the risk from radiation? So it should be, able to be assessed even for someone who may not have an extensive experience on hospital, work industry, but they would be able to identify the, the information that you entered is meeting the requirements of the guidance. Okay. Is it clear?
Yeah, clear. Thank you.
So these hazards are based on the topics that we covered. Okay. So we are not going to give much of technical information explaining about the dental process or the medical terms. As long as even see, we would be mentioning some uh, health risk here. Okay. For example, yesterday when we were discussing, I would say carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay. Or I may say, Wheals disease. Okay. So these informations are something that is covered as part of your syllabus. Okay. So when you're saying carpal tunnel syndrome for ergonomic related activity, that is from your syllabus, but still, even if you're giving any relevant information about a disease name or about an injury that is not covered as part of a syllabus, still as an assessor they would be marking if those informations are relevant. They're just going to see for information that you're entering, it is suitable and appropriate to what the hazards or the workplace that you have identified. Okay. So now next part here is, yeah, so scope. Okay. So make sure your scope is large enough to identify 10 hazard categories. Okay. But if your workplace is very large, then you need to identify the scope that is sufficient enough to accommodate 10 different hazards. So 1.5, an example of how to be written. So here you are only going to explain about the area or the process that is going to be included in the risk assessment. So here I just give informations related to dental activities, like what are the activities carried out in dental department. Like for example, that they receive the patient information as part of admin area or a reception area, and then they record the informations, and then you have inside the dental room what are the equipments used in the dental room. So all this will be given as part of a description in 1.5. Now from that activity and that area I'm going to identify my hazards. Okay. So from dental, if you ask me, I would talk about let me remove this. So they will be using radiations for x-rays and scans, and then the stress related to the job, so mental ill health, violence at work. Some of the patients, they may abuse the staff, or so it is very between patients or patient, their families and the doctors and nurses. Okay. And then I may talk about the use of computers in the reception to record the patient informations, so ergonomics. I may talk about the manual handling, the when they are providing the dental treatments. Okay. Sometimes they have, again, they have to keep some awkward postures. Sometimes they have to be in a and then use of any hazardous substances, the chemicals that they would be handling or using, and then exposure to any biological agents like bacteria or virus, when handling these dental equipments or when dealing with the patients. Then you may talk about welfare and work environment. So working at height, definitely not. I will not include confined space. No, it is not. Lone working, most times there will be people around in the hospital. They are not a lone worker, so there are other colleagues. I may talk about sleep and trips, vehicle, no, no. Handheld tools, yes, I would be using it. And then definitely related to fire and electricity. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I will just remove this. So these are the 10 I may include in my section 2, which is related to my scope, which is dental department. So likewise, if you're doing for an agriculture or a catering and hospitality, okay, or a shoe manufacturing company. So whatever the workplace you select, the hazard categories must be suitably identified to so that they are relevant from the activities that you have identified in the scope. Okay. So definitely you will able to identify 10. So if you are not able to identify 10, increase your scope. Okay. So for example, if I'm doing a risk assessment for a school, maybe only for the play area activities, I would be doing the risk assessment. So from the play area activities, I will identify 10 hazards. Or maybe my scope will be for the classrooms, or the scope will be on the dining area of the school, or maybe any outdoor activities like the swimming pool. So you will have to be very specific what is the scope. But other than that, the workplace is it is a school, because I cannot cover the entire school where there are many areas and departments and activities by just identifying 10 hazards. Okay, that we should not do. So it is school, but in this school this is my scope and these are my 10 hazards, and from these 10 hazards, I'm going to demonstrate my understanding and knowledge of what I have learned about these 10 from my certification. Okay. Yes. So this would be 1.5. Okay. So this 1 to 1.1 to 1.5, you can start working on it. So you have 2 days of, or you take 1 week time. Okay. Take 1 week time to just complete this table, because this is the foundation, the starting point. Okay, if you have clearly defined this section 1, the first table, it gives you a good platform for you to continue other sections. Okay, so we are not including any technical information, all these are generalized information, so you can start from next week. So plan, take 1 week of time, do a research about what is the type of organization you are going to choose, and then decide on the scope and the description of the area. Now, like I said, for those who do not have a work experience, for example, if I have chosen an agriculture, I'll go because I need to know what are the activities carried out in agriculture, what are the health and safety hazards in agriculture. So for that, I need to do some research. Okay, so research is like not an extensive research, a minimal research to understand what agricultural activities and what are the health and safety hazards. So if I go into the micro site of this page, and here you will find some links relevant to help you in your research. So I click health and safety in agriculture, and then I will see if I can go through some informations and see how it is valuable, or go to resources, and then you see there are some useful links here. So definitely you would find some informations, or uh, form voice. Just give me a moment. Yes, Abu Rayhan, your question, please.
Yes, sir. What I have seen, I mean, like you are talking about the hospital and other things. That is the organization actually. So, but we have to go through the task. No, like I am the lifting professional, so I have to choose the activity related to our lifting operation only. No.
Yes, in 1.3, you're going to talk about the organization, what they do, what service they provide, who are they. Then For the risk assessment, here you're going to say my risk assessment will focus on the lifting activity. So from the lifting activity, you are going to identify 10 hazards related to lifting activity, 10 hazards.
Yes, correct. Got it now.
Okay. So now let's say I do not have any workplace, exposure, and I have chosen agriculture. And before starting with my draft, I need to understand more about the agriculture. So what are the health and safety in agriculture? Okay. And here I see these are the safety and health. So from this document, I may, you know, so let me remove all this. So going to remove now. It's 8 o'clock. Okay. So here I can see these are some of the safety and health hazards from agriculture. Okay. I would go and just read through this. And for example, if I could able to identify those hazards. So for instance, I'm going to talk about noise. Okay. And I'm going to talk about vibrations and manual handling and so on. Okay. So what I would do is I go back to my topics and relate how manual, what are in general, I'm going to learn about what are the manual handling or what is a noise, what are the, health and safety risk from exposure to noise, and what are the control measures. And this information will be related to the scope which I have chosen. Okay. So this research will help you to an extent that will help you to identify the 10 hazards. So once you know that these are the 10 hazards that I'm going to include in my section 2, now for that 10 hazard, I would be doing my research. So one for noise, I'll from the 5.1 from the study book or any other references about noise that may help me. For example, I can go and check these documents on noise. This is only for noise. Then I will relate it to my the hazard description I've given in my column 1, which is based on agricultural activities. Okay. So even if I'm not familiarized with agriculture, I could still complete a risk assessment, but provided I need to do some a little research on what agricultural activities and how workplace transport is a risk, or how electricity is a risk, or how biological hazards is a risk. So I need to see the 2 pages. I have to overview, and then based on additional information from my course book and other references, I would be completing this particular column about noise, which is relevant to my scope. Okay. So this again, it is not going to be very technical, but your information must be suitable and sufficient. So when I explain section 2, you'll have a better insight about that. But for now, you just focus on completing the draft of 1.1 to 1.5. So you could take at least 1 week, because like I said, the information to type here, it will not take more than 30 minutes. But this is where you would be doing a lot of research and collecting all the required information. So it sets a good platform to do your other sections. Okay. Because as an assessor or anybody, they would need to know a clear clarity on the information that you provide here, even though it is only for 4 marks in total, but this sets the tone of your assessment. As an assessor, if they are not able to have a clear understanding of your organization or your scope, then they will not able to relate to the hazards or the other informations you're completing in the subsequent sections. So we are not going to explain in detail, but information has to be concise and to the point and relevant. Okay. All right, so with section 1, we will stop with this guidance document. The other sections we would be completing in next week. So we will take a 15 minutes break. After the break, we will continue with the topics. So we will be completing 5.3 and 5.4, and if time permits, we will continue. Okay, so I'll aim to complete these two after the break. So thank you, and we will resume in 15 minutes. And before that, do you have any questions? Or if you have, maybe after the break, you can ask me for clarifications on this section 1. Okay. Thank you. Welcome back after the break. So we will now continue with 5.3 radiation. Okay. Radiation is energy traveling in the form of waves or particles. So when radiation strikes matter, it can transfer the energy. So these are radiation. It is an energy which can be in the form of waves, electromagnetic waves or particles like alpha, beta. These are particle radiations. So two types of radiation, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Okay. Now, what is an ion? Okay. So if you look into the meaning of an ion, okay, so if you look at an atom, it contains these protons, electrons, and the neutrons. Okay. So when an atom loses or gains an electrons, it becomes a charged particle. So that charged particle is what is called as ion. Okay. So if the radiation is striking a material, and if the material changes its structure, okay, I mean the atomic structure, then it is an ionizing radiation. However, if the radiation striking a material does not cause change to the atomic structure but only heating effect, then we call it as non-ionizing radiation. So ionizing is radiation that has sufficient energy to ionize cells in the human body. So ionize means where it a stable atom, it becomes a charged particle because of the energy from the radiation. Okay. So atoms consist of three types of subatomic particles: protons, electrons, and neutrons. Okay. So this is what any matter, they consist of these atoms, and you have three particles. So the neutrons, where it is neutrally charged particles. So when an atom loses or gains an electrons, then it becomes a charged, and we call that as an ion. Now, so one categorization what we would be discussing is ionizing, non-ionizing. For example, if you look at ionizing radiation, which has sufficient energy to change the structure of the atom. So examples of ionizing are alpha, beta particles, neutrons. Okay. And then we would be discussing about the non-ionizing radiation. So examples like visible light, ultraviolet radiation, microwaves, radio frequency waves, laser, these are non-ionizing because they do not change the structure of the atoms on the material that it strikes, but rather only cause heating effects. Okay, all right. So looking at the alpha, beta particles and neutrons. Now again, in your risk assessment, you are not going to explain the properties of these radiations. Okay. So we are just going to say what is the source of radiation that causes harm to people at workplace, and what are the health and safety risks, the risk factors, and we are going to discuss about the controls. Okay. Now, alpha particles, they have a very large mass, okay, heavy particles. So that means they cannot penetrate very far. They cannot travel long distance in air, and they have a very weak penetrating power. So that means in terms of hazard, they can be stopped by a piece of paper or a layer of skin. So they cannot penetrate through our skin layer. So because of its large mass and weak penetrating power. Most dangerous if get inside the body, and it can cause intense local damage. Now, beta particles, they are fast moving electrons. They can travel more distance, and they have a higher penetrating power than alpha particles. So they can be stopped by a sheet of plastic. So inside the body, they cause less severe but more widespread damage to the body. Neutrons, very energetic particles, it needs a thick concrete to stop them. So they have a very high penetrating power, and they can travel long distance in air. So it needs a shielding, something like a thick concrete to stop them. Okay. So in terms of shielding, you can see here. Okay. So alpha particles, they can be shielded by a paper. Beta particles, aluminum plate. X-rays, gamma rays, lead, neutrons, concrete. So this is the type of radiation and the penetration power. Okay. So what are the health effects of these radiations? Okay. Now, before that, if you look at the occupational sources, okay, now ionizing radiation, gamma rays, they are used to sterilize food. Alpha particles, they are used in smoke detectors. So inside the smoke detector, there is a radioactive element, which is americium. So they are used in smoke detectors. And then nuclear power plant, neutrons and beta particles, and then X-rays in hospitals, in airport, okay, used in X-ray machines. And then non-ionizing radiation will be coming later. So with ionizing radiation, what are the health effects? Okay. Now remember, it will affect every cells in our body. Okay. So from reddening of the skin, skin burns, cataracts in the eye. So it forms like a cloudy lens in the eye, so causing a blurred vision. Radiation sickness. Now this can happen if we are exposed to a high dose of radiation for a very short period of time. The best is these nuclear incidents. For example, this 1970s, the Chernobyl, nuclear incident. So from any nuclear incident where a high dose of radiation received for a very short period of time would result in radiation sickness, and then hair loss, and cancer causing agents. Okay, so it will affect the white blood cells in our body. Okay, and then genetic cell damage, so and also causing birth defects. So genetic cell damage where it will be passed on to other generations, and it will change the genetic structure of our body cells. Okay, so it will cause mutation and also causing birth defects. So these are ionizing radiation health effects. Now, non-ionizing, as we discussed, they do not cause changes in the structure of the atom of the material that it is striking. So examples of sources of non-ionizing radiations: visible lights, like the one we use, the artificial lighting, the computers and laptops, which is display screen equipment, and then ultraviolet UV rays, from the sun, or from your arc welding or drying printing ink, okay, or use sterilizing water to kill bacteria, okay, so those are UV, or even in your water filters, you will notice the UV to kill the bacteria and germs. And then sources of microwaves, industrial microwave cookers, mobile phones, radar speed gun emitting microwaves, RF radio frequency waves, vehicle aerials, radio frequency transmitter towers, infrared, any significant heat source. Okay, so any where there are source of heat or fire, infrared. And then lasers, like using in checkout scanners in retail stores or supermarkets or other industries. And then eye surgery. So all these are different sources of non-ionizing radiation. Okay, now what are the health effects from exposure to these radiations? So exposure to UV radiation can cause arc eye, exposure to arc welding UV light, so causing damages and also other risk of cataracts in the eyes. And then sunburn from exposure to UV radiation, skin cancer, and premature aging of the skin. Okay, so the person may only be 30 years, but he may look like 40, 45 years old. So premature aging of the skin can happen from exposure to this UV light. And then other health effects, damage to the cornea of the eye. So cornea is the lens of the eye. So, and then cataracts, the blurred vision, forming a clouding lens, and then damage to internal organs such as the liver and kidney from microwave radiation. So similar to what we discussed in noise and vibration, the two factors here is, one is the level of the amount of radiation people are exposed, and second, the frequency and duration of exposure. So when we are discussing control measures, so we will understand how reducing the exposure time or increasing the distance from the source are very significant controls for radiations. So control measures for ionizing, shielding, distance, time. Okay, shielding we already discussed. So a material with the appropriate density to stop the radiation. For radiation that is more penetrative, the shielding must be thicker or denser to stop it, like lead or concrete. Distance, alpha and beta particles, they can only travel a few meters in the air. So by increasing the distance, from the source, it is a very effective form of control because they don't travel a long distance in the air. But increasing the distance from the source of radiation will reduce the level of radiation exposure for workers. Now, this would be very best explained with an inverse square law. Inverse square law states that a specified physical quantity or intensity, okay, intensity is inversely proportionate to the square of the distance from the source. Okay, so what happens is, if I increase the distance from the source, the intensity of from the source, it drops by 2 times. Okay, so if I double the distance, 4 times the intensity drops. If I increase the distance by 3 times, 9 times the intensity drops. Okay, so if I, for example, if you check here, you see I1, I2, D2, D1. Okay, uh, for example, let's say I'm standing at a distance of, okay, so distance of 3 meter from a source. Okay, and from this 3 meter source, the intensity level the worker would be exposed. Let's say it is 10 sievert. So this is the unit of radiation measurement. Okay, so where the distance is 3 meter from the radiation source, the intensity is 10 sievert. Okay, now if I'm increasing the distance by 2 times, okay, so now the distance of 6 meter. So I'm moving farther away from the radiation source. Okay. Now we need to calculate what is the intensity. So to what extent the intensity level drops. Okay. Now this 3 meter is my distance 1. Okay, I call it as D1. This 6 meter is my new distance, distance 2. Okay. And then this 10 sievert is my original intensity. I call as intensity 1. And this intensity 2 is what I'm going to calculate. Okay. So again, this calculation is only for your understanding of this particular statement, how increasing the distance will reduce the level of radiation exposure for workers. Okay. So I have four values. D1, the original distance from the source. I1 is the original intensity from the source at that distance D1. Now I am increasing the distance by 2 times from 3 meter to 6 meter. That is my new distance D2. And then I2 is what I need to calculate. Now by looking into this, I1 by I2 equal to D2 square by D1 square. So we need to calculate I2, the new intensity. So the formula here is I1. So what is I1? So to calculate I2, my I1 is 10. Okay. And then I multiply by D1 square by D2 square. So my D1 is 3. So 3 square is 9. Okay. And I divide by D2 square. So D2 is 6. 6 square is 36. Okay. So which is 2.5. So what happened is, so it is inversely proportionate. It means by you increase the distance, the intensity drops. You decrease the distance, intensity increases. So the intensity is inversely proportionate to the square of the distance from the source. So I'm increasing the distance by 2 times. It means the square of the distance 2 times is 4. So intensity level drops by 4 times. And you can see here the original intensity was 10. Now from 10 it dropped by 4 times, which is 2.5. Okay. So this is the power of increasing the distance from the radiation source. Okay. So the from 10 it has dropped to 2.5 by just doubling the distance from the source. Next is time. Keep radiation exposure time to the minimum required for the task. So by reducing the exposure time, it reduces the radiation damage. Okay, because the amount of radiation I receive and the time is now directly proportional. So you increase the time, increase the exposure and the damage. You reduce the time, reduce the exposure and damage. So the here time is directly proportionate. So as it increases, the damage increases, whereas distance is inversely proportionate. So by increasing the distance, it reduces the damage and the intensity. Okay. So for ionizing, the protection strategies, controlled and supervised areas. So only authorized person to work. Okay, whether it is where you're using the X-ray machines in hospitals, or the the nuclear power plants, or any places where there are radiation exposures. So controlled and supervised areas and designated area for working, because the work area is designated and controlled in such way that the radioactive or radiation does not leak. Okay. And then signed place at entrance points. So radiation sign hazard. So you could see, so these are the signboards to be placed at the appropriate location to warn of people. Sealed sources of radiation, so they do not cause any, leak or exposure. Radiation dose to be monitored. So again, similar to noise and vibration, there are radiation exposure limits. So it is important to monitor so that people, they do not exceed the exposure limits. And then exclude vulnerable workers. Okay, so vulnerable workers, again, pregnant women, young person, people with disabilities, and also people who already have a history of their medical records from exposure symptoms. And then suitable storage of materials, appropriate PPs and RP. Now PP is as you know, personal protective equipment where they would be using that full radiation protection suits. RP is a respiratory protective equipment. So where it protects your respiration system. Okay. So for example, the mask to protect from inhaling this, where these particle radiations they can enter your body, because these alpha particles outside the body, they are not hazardous because they cannot travel long distance, and they have very weak penetrating power, but it can get inside the body through your nasal breathing system. For example, let's say there is a radioactive gas, and if I inhale that gas, now alpha particles will be inside the body where the potential of damage is high. So no eating, drinking, smoking, or cosmetic application in the vicinity. So all these will provide a route of entry into your body. Okay. So important to maintain a very high standard of personal hygiene. Emergency arrangements in place in case of any emergencies or other radiation leak or spill, and then training and workers confirmed as medically fit. So before you start as a classified worker, okay, there will be a health assessment undertaken, and you should be declared fit. And then through the ongoing period, your health monitoring would be undertaken as part of the comprehensive health surveillance program. And along with that, your exposure records would also be monitored. Okay. So as part of health surveillance, your skin check is also very much mandatory, because any damaged skin can cause this radiation to find a route into your body. So a comprehensive health surveillance program will include all those examinations. So here, the competent person, they would appoint a radiation protection officer, or sometimes they are called as radiation protection supervisors. Okay. So the radiation protection officer, so they would be responsible for helping employer apply radiation laws. Okay. Now, as part of your control measure, you're just going to specify that whether a radiation protection officer is available and what duties they do. Okay. So how they would help employer apply radiation laws. So they ensure the work involving occupational exposure is supervised, supervise workplace monitoring at appropriate intervals, maintain and retain up-to-date exposure records, because it is important to know the worker frequencies and total exposure duration record, and then provide well-maintained and tested PPEs. So you could see a full body radiation protection suit, and here this is your RPE, respiratory protective equipment, and then ensure workers receive monitoring at appropriate intervals. So constant monitoring is required to see what is the radioactive activity and radiation levels, and then establish local rules. So your local regulatory standard will tell what is the exposure limit, and the intent here is to keep worker exposure within the limit. Now, in general, for radiation, whatever the limit is, the it is already a very safe limit from what it can cause these damages, because the laws are very strict with radiation, considering the potential of the severity of the damage that it can cause. Okay. So controls for non-ionizing. Okay. Non-ionizing, very much skin protections, and protection in terms of PPEs, and uh, the trainings and awareness, and also the distance and time. So for ultraviolet, from arc welding or from sun working outdoor construction activities, okay, like here in this part of the world where outdoor activity is restricted for during the time from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m., where the exposure could be very severe from the temperature heat. So reducing time exposure enclose the source. Okay, so where the source, it should be completely enclosed, or the activity should only be carried out in the designated areas, and wear appropriate PP to protect your face, eyes, especially these, cataracts and other, and then protecting your skin from burns and from skin cancer. And then infrared shielding, reduce the time exposure and appropriate eye protection and clothing. Microwaves, metal surrounding, interlocked door. Now, if you notice your domestic microwave appliance, it has an interlock system. For example, let's say the microwave is on state. Okay, so it is running, and what happens when you open the door of the microwave? It stops, right? So that is the interlock system. So when the microwave is on, and when you open the door, it stops. So that prevents any radiation exposure or through leak. So this is the interlock system, interlock door. And then inspections for microwave leakage and sufficient distance. Okay, so these are industrial microwaves. It is important to maintain sufficient distance. And then radio frequency or lasers, again appropriate distance for these radio, because all these can cause internal organ damage. The more the radiation, the exposure and the intensity, it could cause internal organ damage. Okay, so you would be listing the controls depending on what is the source of your radiation, whether it is an ultraviolet, infrared, or microwave. And then we are going to identify the risk in your column number 2 of section 2. And column 3 and column 4 is where you would be writing your control measures. Okay. So health surveillance, identify potential breakdowns and control measures so they can be rectified and high standards of health maintained. Okay, so any health surveillance is to identify any signs or symptoms shown by people, which also helps in identifying the ineffectiveness of the existing controls. Okay, so the surveillance will include medical examinations, a physical skin check, and other diagnosis, and then biological monitoring. For instance, the blood test or urine test to check for the biological contaminants inside your body, and then radiological examinations for more uh, a deeper diagnosis, and the review of your health records, which shows the history of your health assessment. Medical examination is typically required for workers exposed to significant radiation. Okay. So non-ionizing radiation health surveillance, eye test and examination, and skin inspections were working with ultraviolet and infrared sources. Next part is mental ill health. So from here, it will start with psychological health hazards. So what we covered is physical health hazards, which includes noise, vibration, and radiation. Okay. Now, in this particular learning outcome, as you see, there are six hazard categories from this list. Okay. So we have seven chapters. So that means, and from those seven chapters of GIC2, we have a total of 21. Okay. So how we are going to select the 10? Number one is those 10 hazard categories that you are selecting should be relevant to the scope of your risk assessment. Your scope will define what is the area or the process or activity for which the risk assessment is completed. Okay. And from the 10 that you're selecting, the 10 should be from at least five different elements. Okay. So here you have six hazard categories from element number five. Okay. You can select one or more than one from any element. Okay. It is not that from this element you should select only two or no. I can even select all six from here, or maybe one or two or three. But when I'm including 10, the 10 should cover from at least five different elements. Okay. So this you should clearly check, because the moment I start, working on this, I will start listing all the hazard categories here. For example, noise and radiation. And I fail to check whether these 10 are from five different elements. So that is very important check that you should do. Okay. Because some of the elements will have many number of hazard categories. Okay. Like for example, just a minute, I'll be back. Yeah. So it is easy to commit a mistake of not selecting your hazard categories from minimum five. So minimum is five. You can select from six or seven, whichever is relevant to the scope of your assessment. Okay. So this particular element and element number eight also includes more number of topics from welfare to here. So this is element number eight. Okay. So these are the elements where you will have, you will be including more number of topics. And in general, if you ask me, irrespective of what type of workplace you choose, okay, like whether you choose a hospital or a school or a construction site, or like there's a supermarket or a manufacturing plant or chemical plant, okay, or an office, okay, irrespective of what type of workplace we choose, there are certain hazards that would be included in almost every scope of the risk assessment. Okay, so you cannot say that in this workplace electricity is not a hazard, or in this workplace fire is not a hazard. So these are something that will be very much in every risk assessment scope. Okay. Again, slip and trip would be there in most scopes. Okay, slip and trip in most workplaces, it would be a potential hazard to cause harm. Okay, and likewise, stress. Okay, so stress is something that is inherent with any type of work. We cannot say that, this work or this job, there is no stress. So these are some of the hazards that you could relate in most. But again, you will be deciding what are those 10, but still, these are some things that you can, make a note of it when you're identifying those. 1 minute. Darshan. Yes, so
It's 9 o'clock.
there are certain hazards that would be included in most scope. So you should also make a very careful approach when identifying those 10 hazards. So for example, if fire is not included in your risk assessment, you cannot justify saying that fire is not a potential hazard in my scope. So the risk assessment should include hazards which has the potential to cause harm in your workplace. So based on that approach, we are going to identify those 10 hazards. Okay. All right. So Make use of your next 2 days where we don't have session and see if you can review this page number from 5 to 7 where we discussed about the requirements of 1.1 to 1.5 and start doing some research and keep a deadline like by next week you complete your section 1. So the initial start would be a little challenging. So once you start, the momentum kicks in and you will start preparing the draft. Okay, but still remember, you still have 2 weeks of time from your GC1 to complete. But if you can find a good time now, you can slowly start working on this draft. Okay, so I will be sharing the form and the guidance document in the WhatsApp. So you will be having this form, so you can start working on the draft. Okay. All right. So with this, we will complete for this week. So next week, Monday, session number 15. Okay. So we will complete 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, and we would also immediately start with 6.1 and 6.2, which is about work-related upper limb disorder and manual handling. Okay. All right. So thank you all and have a good and safe weekend. We will catch up week 4 on Monday. Thank you. Uh, I would be available online for another 15 minutes. So let me know if you have any clarifications.